God, I love to start a show with the word God. God had created mighty things in this world, 10 mighty things, in fact. For example, rock. Rock is mighty.
Yes, rock is mighty, and yet the iron can cut it.
Yes, the iron can cut it, that's true. Iron is mighty, but fire can make it soft.
Fire is mighty, yet water can quench it.
Water is mighty, yet a cloud can carry it.
Cloud is mighty, yet wind can disperse it.
Wind is mighty, indeed. Yet a man can endure it.
Man is mighty, yet fear can break him.
I thought you were going to say a woman.
I'm not. My wife is sitting there. It's not going to happen.
A woman can break him.
Woman and fear is quite similar. No, let's move on.
Okay, fear. Fear is mighty, yet wine can drown it. Have you noticed?
Wine is mighty, yet sleep can dissipate it.
Sleep is mighty. Yet death is mightier. In the beginning, there was a void, darkness that was layering on top of the deep. The water below and the water above, they were one. There was no separation until this invisible hand came and started to differentiate between below and above, between wet and dry, between in and out. And then the opening of two eyes, seeing the light for the first time.
In the beginning, everything was created in perfect order, all on top of each other. Everything that was to have been, everything that is yet to be, all existing in the same moment, in the same perfect, unmoving time that is until...
By the way, this is not just the beginning of this all the creation tales. But it's also a story that happens to all of us sitting in this room, including you in the home on the sofa, us sitting on stage. We are talking about being inside the belly of your mother.
Right? Ladies and gentlemen, and latecomers, but also ladies and gentlemen, I'm assuming. Welcome to the opening show, the opening night of the 13th edition of the Storytelling Festival. A festival that, just like this night, has the theme Rebirth.
And that's not an accident. I mean, you have seen the latest situation. You can imagine how the theme might relate to it. We have seen the world turn upside down. We had to reinvent ourselves, think, how are we going to communicate with our audiences under the current conditions, and like this, we added this idea of also streaming some of our shows, some of the talks that we will have this week.
Yeah. Which, by the way, if you're watching from back home, this is not just a one-time thing. I'm just saying it again. Every day for the duration of this whole festival, we will have talks that we've curated with a lot of love and a lot of passion with very interesting artists. So do come back tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after. But for tonight, let's get back to our night that we have here, which, by the way, we are doing with some amazing artists. I don't know if you know them. If you haven't met them yet, this is the moment to meet them. They are amazing artists that we're happy to work with. On the oud, there is Haitham Safia. Yes. A dear friend, wonderful singer. This is Jinske Silva.
And we discovered something very interesting in the behind the scenes, that we are all born in the same year, 1980.
Why did you mention the
I
year?
know, I'm sorry.
It's not relevant at all for
No,
this
I didn't
story.
look at her on purpose. Didn't come from her. He didn't want.
Anyway, we are all here. The year is not significant, and we're going to continue this night of stories, maybe with a bit of singing, right? Yeah.
Mãe, tem a ver, dá-me a direito de nascer. Pai, quando eu nascer, dá-me a direito de viver. Fazer-nos lar, lugar mais sábio no mundo. Fazendo infância, um jardim de felicidade. Ajuda-me a crescer, com tudo amor e amizade. Dá-me bom carinho, boa ternura, oh mãe querida, que Deus dá. Mãe tem a ver, dá-me a direito de nascer. Pai, quando eu nascer, dá-me a direito de viver. Fazer-nos lá lugar mais sábio no mundo. Fazendo infância, um jardim de felicidade. Ajuda-me a crescer, com tudo amor e amizade. Dá-me bom carinho, boa ternura, oh mãe querida, que Deus dá. Dá-me leite, bom peito sagrado, mamãe querida. Dá-me bom sustento abençoado, papai querido. Ajuda-me a viver minhas ilusões, minhas fantasias. Minha boa flor de revolução, me que é broto fruto de alegria.
Okay, Rafa, quick. An image of kindness that you remember of your mother.
My mother, which is, by the way, also because of this stream, is probably watching from Israel. It's one of the first time that it can happen, so this is for you, an image from you, mother. I remember when I was a child, I grew up really in the middle of nowhere in the Galilee. It's very hot land, but in the winter it can get really cold because there is not central heating. And I remember how we used to, my brother and I, kind of go under the duvet in very cold nights, and my mother would sit next to us, and she would play with a guitar that was always missing 2 strings, but it didn't matter because she would play open strings, you know. And then the songs would come from her gut, and as a voice would enter our ears, we would slowly enter another world.
Yeah, I remember something similar. I remember how when we just had arrived in the Netherlands, we didn't have mobile phones yet, we would go from the house of one Iranian to the next, and it would just kind of keep going back and forth because the Iranian community in Europe was so small, everyone knew each other. So you would drive to The Hague or to Utrecht or to another city, and there everyone you knew was just cramped in one room around the sofre, which is the piece of cloth you put on the floor where all the food is kind of stacked, and everyone is sitting around it. And these were all, refugees from Iran, so a lot of young political activists, not a lot of children, so usually I'd be the only one kind of looking bored at everyone with my arm on the leg of my mother. and I'm trying to reach some of the food, but it's too far away. So my mother comes and puts all the food on the plate, and then I look at this, complex, rich Persian food, and I don't like my meat to be too, with a lot of skin or fat or bone. So my mother, she takes all the skin, all the meat, and just dissects it, separates the skin and the bone, and what remains on my plate is this big, fluffy pile of meat. And then I just eat in silence. Yeah.
My mother, I remember, we would play football. That would be our favorite hobby back in the village. And we would play it every day, very long hours. And I remember one day playing with all the friends, and suddenly I hear from afar this engine, loud engine. And coming from the distance, I see this orange Beetle, these kind of old Beetle cars, orange. And the car comes in, and suddenly the window goes down, and to my horror, I see that this is my mother in the front seat. And she goes, "Hi!" And I kind of look down at the ground, and I pray to God that there will be a hole there that will swallow me whole. But then later on as the years passed by, and I looked back at this, I realized, my God, what a cool woman my mother is.
Yeah. My mother cycling me in the cold Dutch weather, going again, like the Iranians did, from one place to the next, where, I don't know, again, they rented this place for some political activism, for a night of meeting and discussing the next action. And one of these times, I remember the cycle was quite long, the drive to it, and I'm sitting behind the seat of my mother, and this wind and this rain is in my face, and she can't quite find the place, or I remember vaguely that when she found it, she didn't quite know where the entrance was, and she needed to pee badly. So she took me to the side of the road, to some bushes, and then she asked me to turn around. And then, like that, I heard from behind me my mother, who had squatted, unzip, and then I could hear this stream come from her. And in the corner of my eye, I see this sort of liquid in the mud. And also, I thought, this is horrible, only for a few years later to think, actually, what a cool mother this is, right? Yeah.
So, Haitham,
Yes.
if your mother was sitting here next to us, and she would tell you, play me a song, what would you play for her?
Oh, I would improvise for her something like cheerful and happy. Should I do it? Yeah.
So guys, you see, we're trying to get into the mood, sharing a few things about our mothers, about whatever is kind of floating here. But only fair if you share something with us as well, right? Right? So if we would now go to you, and we would just kind of ask you, for whoever kind of someone feels something bubbling up, if you think of an image of kindness of your mother, what do you think of?
What image pops in your mind? Waffles.
Waffles.
Okay, that's a good beginning.
Yeah.
Great.
Do we want him to elaborate on waffles?
Yeah,
or-
waffles. Elaborate on waffles.
Yeah.
Yeah, last time when I went home, she told me that before I leave, she wants to make waffles. And the smell in that morning when I woke up was amazing.
So waking up with an incredible smell from the waffles.
Just before he left home for the last time.
Wonderful.
That's beautiful. Thank
Good
you so much.
beginning.
Yeah.
So, another one. Mother, come on, you have mothers, right? You have mothers? An image of act of kindness from your mother. Yeah.
I was come also from Iran. I remember when I was young, and there was no central heat. So during the winter time, every time we came home from school, she was putting tea and cookies. Every time we are sitting around the heat, and she was explaining things. So that is actually how I remember.
Wow, so this image of coming home to an Iranian house in the winter, no central heating, but a little bit of heat in the center of the house, and mother bringing tea and cookie and just explaining things. Beautiful.
Nice, beautiful.
Beautiful, thank you, thank you.
We actually have a mother on stage.
Yes. I am, yes. Well, what do I do? There is, actually when I think about the kindness to my daughter is when I didn't know her yet, when she was in my belly and I sang her a song. Well, actually, it's just a hum that came up. And when you sing it in the belly, it will always get calm, the baby. So afterwards, she would always sleep. So I still sing it. She's 8. And when it's difficult, I do it. Because she sleeps. It goes something like this.
When my mother was 6 years old, this little Iranian girl in the same house like the one you described, not central heating, but a little bit of heat in the center of the house, she found herself next to that heat, and she thought about the thing that she enjoys the most in life, which in the case of my mother in Iran was singing. Now you have to imagine, when my mother thought of singing, she didn't think of children's songs. No, when my mother sang, she sang the songs that she heard on the radio when she was visiting friends, Persian songs with beautiful poetic lyrics. And when she sang as a kid, she could feel these songs come out of her mouth like diamonds, emeralds,
When
rubies.
my mother was 6 years old, she was looking forward for the moment that her mother will take her with her to the marketplace. Big thing back in Iran, because my mother originally comes from Iran, actually. You know, my mother is one of the stronger people I ever met in my life, I'll tell you. And already when she was 6, she was incredibly strong, stubborn. In fact, they called her Kala Resiya, which is in Persian, and it means what? Translation?
Black Raven.
Black Raven. Right? Why did they call her Black Raven? Well, because of the color of her skin, which was a little bit like mine. She didn't look like her sister, Soraya, that had this white, beautiful skin and looked just like the daughter of the Shah, as some people said. Not my mother, but my mother had this fire inside. And she kept telling my grandmother, take me to the marketplace. And my grandmother said, when you will be 7, I will take you, okay? So what do you think happened the day she turned 7? The sun was not even up in the sky, and my mother was already up on her feet. The most beautiful hijab was already decorating her face with flowers on it. She was standing next to the bed of my grandmother, shaking her, waking her up, saying, I'm 7. Are you going to take me to the marketplace? My grandmother had no choice. And my mother told me, as when she walked into the marketplace, that was a magnificent sight. This is not Albert Heijn we're talking about. It's not a piece of parsley like this wrapped with plastic and a poor cucumber wrapped with some more plastic. No, I'm talking about mountains of spices in different colors, like camels, walking in the desert. And the smell of fruits, the sweet smell of watermelons, and the oranges that are ripe. And the men, they're walking around pretending who is the strongest one, picking up the watermelon, tapping them to see if they are ripe. And my mother, she kind of walked around among all that, and suddenly she was lost, and there in front of her eyes, she saw this big, beautiful vegetable stall. And in front of her eyes, she saw this fat aubergine. And she reached out to touch it. And she will never forget what her mother told her next.
Well, my mother will never forget what her mother told her when she came back from the market. Huh? You remember that girl, 6 years old, loving to sing, right? Yeah? So she was at home practicing the songs. You know, she had to wait for her mother to be at the bazaar because, you know, her shyness didn't allow her to sing in front of her mother. But at home, finally alone, the songs were coming out, the melodies were coming out, and she realized she actually has a voice. It's a good voice. So this time when she heard the key of the mother in the door, she didn't stop. She continued singing, and she realized her mother will now hear what a voice her daughter has. And then she heard the footsteps in the hallway, and then suddenly her mother was standing in front of her and said, "Don't sing!
Don't touch the vegetables." That's what my grandmother said to my mother. And then my grandmother pointed out the vegetables. And the seller, he took them and he carefully placed them in a box, and he handed this box to my grandmother.
Why can't I sing? Simple question from a 6-year-old girl to her mother. Why can't I sing? Well, her mother explained with a lot of patience, "My child, when you sing, and a man you're not related to hears your voice, then he will go to hell, Jahannam, and you, because you're responsible for it, maybe you also will go to hell and you will burn." And then my mother said, but, Maman, I have friends who sing in my school, in my class. Yes, that's very unfortunate for your friends, but we don't sing. We are good Muslims.
Why couldn't I touch the vegetables? That's what my mother asked when they arrived back home. And my grandmother said, "Well, if you would have touched the vegetables, no one else would." Why? I saw it. All the other people were doing it. "Yes," said my grandmother, "but you see, we are not like all the other people. We are Jewish."
When my mother turned 16, she was a studious girl. She was the hardest working girl in her class, in her school, and she knew that if she kept up her grades, the best universities of Tehran would fight over her to have her as a student. So every day she would come home with her school books, and she would go up to her room and she would study. Well, there was a day that she noticed that they have now new neighbors living across the street. And she noticed that these neighbors have one kid, well, not so much a kid, it's a young man. Their son, few years older than him, is the handsomest man that she has seen in her life. He's tall, broad shoulders, straight back. And my mother realizes that actually this is something that she shouldn't focus on. Because what is the most important now for her are her studies. So every day, coming home from school, she would take those same books, pass the younger brothers and sisters sort of playing in the living room, and go up to her little study room on the top floor. There, she would lock the door behind her and focus on her studies and stay there in that room for hours on end. Well, when her first report card came in that year, it showed the result of all this hard work. You see my mother with her perfect grades. All these grades had completely dropped. You see that room? That was also the room that gave her a perfect view into the bedroom of the boy across the street, right? So that's the moment that my mother didn't quite know if any university would still accept her. But she knew exactly what she wanted.
Well, my mother knew exactly what she didn't want. Kalarisia, Black Raven, strong, powerful, fire in her gut. Strong fire, so strong in fact that her parents didn't know what to do with her. So they decided that she should get married as fast as possible. Maybe a man would be able to tame her. They found one. My mother told me how she came back from school one day and she dropped the bag in the living room, and there was a knock at the door. She opened the door and there stood a man. Well, you know, suit, some cologne, smell of cologne from his neck, and he was holding this box of chocolates. And my mother, she let him in, and before she knows it, he was sitting in the living room in front of my grandparents, and they were talking. And when she leaned forward to see what they were saying, they told her, go to the kitchen, bring some tea. So she went inside the kitchen, where she saw her sister, Soraya, the one with the white skin. And when her sister saw her, she said, "Wow, have you seen that man? He's quite nice, no? Have you seen the golden ring on his fingers?" And my mother said, "I don't want to be another golden ring on his fat finger. I hate him."
I love him. It's what my mother said to her mother. Oh, never mind, go on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that day,
Yeah.
around that table,
Mm-hmm.
a deal was struck. They would get married exactly a year later.
1 year.
1 year.
1 year, 1 year. You know how long a year takes when you want something to happen and it doesn't happen? It's like an eternity, right? Right? I mean, you remember being 16 and in love, right? My God, 1 year. 1 year is how long it took my mother to get this guy living across the street just to notice her. This boy. Okay, let me tell you how she did it. She would wait until her mother is gone to the bazaar, and then when she was alone in the house, she would open the windows of the house, and then she would hide under the window so you can't see her, but of course with her voice you can hear her, right? And then when the boy is in the garden, my mother, she would start to sing. And not just, just for herself. No, she would sing for her emotions, transform them to secret messages that she would send for this guy across the street. But whenever she was done singing, she would get up and the street would be empty. The garden would be empty. Until one day, a whole year later, she was in that same spot, and this time, when she sang, every cell in her body sang. Everything that she had inside of her, all of it, it was kind of like shaking. And her voice suddenly came out. One song, another, a third. And this time when she got up to look at an empty street, to her surprise, she saw that this man was standing there, looking at her with his big grin on his face.
A year, It can pass very quickly when something you don't want to happen is about to happen. It was a day before the wedding. And you know, Iranian houses, they usually have this garden in the center of them. At least that's what my mother told me. And in the center of the garden, there is a tree. In the case of my mother, that was a mulberry tree. And that garden was like a beehive. It was the day before the wedding. The women, they were running around. They were cleaning the floor. They were trimming the tree. The men, they were incredibly busy playing backgammon. And the smell of cooking was coming from the kitchen. And my mother, she was sitting in her bedroom. She was looking at the mirror. And she was thinking about all the things she wanted to do with her life. You know, to study in the university. Or to travel all around the world. To become a successful doctor. And she sat there. On one side, there was her childhood bed with the dolls she grew up with her study books, and on another side, on a chair, the wedding dress. And she waited until it was evening. I'll tell you, that girl, Kalare Sia, Black Raven, the one that was always pushed aside, she waited until it was evening. She stood up, she opened the door, she went down, she found my grandmother, she looked her dead in the eye, and she said, "There is not a chance in the world that I'm going to marry that man.
There is not a chance in the world that I am not marrying that man." That's what my mother said to her mother. Well, that's the moment that my grandmother realized that it's easier to take the devil and turn him into another prophet than to force my mother not to marry the man that she loves.
And that's the moment my grandmother realized that it's going to be easier to change the color of my mother's skin than to force her to marry a man she didn't love.
Of course, I have to say my grandmother did try still a little bit. I mean, my grandmother, okay, full story, you want to have the whole thing. 3 years, she still kind of kept postponing the wedding. And in these 3 years, she brought proper Muslim men to meet my mother, you know, not like the communists, this wild boy from across the street that she had met. But my mother kept rejecting all of them. And then finally, my grandmother thought, okay, you know what? If we can't change her mind, maybe we can fix his mind. So they opened the doors of the house for the first time to this neighbor boy, and he came in and he sat at the table, and then they brought in this fat imam who sat in front of him, and for the whole night he kept talking about the beauty of the old holy texts, you know, the spirituality in the Quran, and he just kept talking and talking and talking. But, you know, let me tell you, not only did this man never become a proper Muslim, after they got married, even my mother became a communist. Yeah?
It took 3 years for my mother to leave Iran behind her and move to Israel, a land that she had heard about so much. She arrived there with nothing, not knowing the language, and she went to study in the university. And later on, she would meet my father and raise her children, including myself. And I'll tell you one thing, she did it in whichever way she wanted to. And no one in the entire world could tell her otherwise. אדון על כל המעשים ברוך ומבורך בפי כל הנשמה.
سر اومد زمستون شکفته بهارون گل سرخ خورشید باز اومد و شب شد گریزون
אל אדון על כל המעשים
تو کوها دارن گل 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 آفتاب میکارن سر اومد زمستون شکفته بهارون گل سرخ خورشید باز اومد و شب شد گریزون توی کوهستون داره میاره شکنج و گل و گندم داره میاره توی سینه‌اش جان 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 توی سینه‌اش جان 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 یک جنگل ستاره داره جهان جهان یک جنگل ستاره داره
ladron al kol ha'ma'asim baruch hu mevorach befi kol hanshama.
So, we knew we were going to ask you about your mothers, and we knew that we were going to talk about our mothers. And we thought, you know what? Let's ask this question also to some people on the internet. So we sent out some emails and on the Facebook, and people started to reply to us. And there's a few that actually were very nice. We wanted to share with you.
Yeah, one person wrote, my mom used to knead me like a dough when I was in bed, singing song and moving me my whole body like making fresh pasta. And then in brackets, I am Italian after all. I am Italian after all.
Look, here's another one. When I was a boy, my mother had to get by with very little money each month and 2 hungry boys that needed feeding each week. We'd ask, Mom, what's for dinner tonight? And on average, 3 times a week, we would be told shepherd's pie. Ah, not again, we'd moan. Now, today, my favorite question to ask people is, what is the taste of home for you? Because for me, shepherd's pie is hardwired into my system, the British comfort food. When my mother visits me, it has become a cherished tradition that I make shepherd's pie for her, a dish that is hearty, filling, and served with love.
Here's another one. Mom used to stroke and scratch my scalp, and that would immediately make me drowsy and I would fall asleep. I did the same to my daughter. It's total bonding.
Yeah, total bonding. Guys, I'm the mother on this stage, right? Okay. Let me tell you, it's nice to be in a pedestal, but it's not easy being a mother. And I'm going to tell you, actually, there is a part of being a mom which is really hard raising a kid, you know? And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. Once I saw on Facebook a video, I'm very emotional about this because I really want you to know about this. There was a video of a mom exhausted after years of not sleeping, totally didn't know what to do with the child, so she got a pillow and she hit the kid on the head, and again, and again. And you should have seen the Facebook comments of people who are not mothers saying, "Oh, that's child abuse." Well, actually, all the mothers who saw it kind of were like, I understand her. I understand how it feels. We don't want child abuse. We're good for our children. We give love every day, but it's hard. It's hard, and sometimes...
Yeah, we know.
Sometimes.
No, we know.
Sometimes.
But, we can tell these stories as well, but our mothers are watching in the stream,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, of course. Oh, my mother's watching. Hi, Mom, sorry.
Yeah.
Actually, I have to say, it does help us a little bit for this kind of emotional outburst of yours.
Thank you.
Because we do have some stories about some of the other aspects of motherhood, but we thought, if we just kind of directly dive into it, people are going to think, what are these men talking about? But thank you so much for a mother kind of opening this.
Welcome.
Thank you. Very good. Yeah? Shall we do the story? If you're over your emotional outburst. Yeah?
I am.
When you're done
Please
laughing,
do. Yes,
create some angelic moment for us. Yeah? So we can go into our story.
Once upon a time, there was a couple, and they had everything. land, a mansion, and in the middle of their garden, a juniper tree. Beautiful. And more important than all of that, flowing between them like a river, they had love. They had everything. Well, not exactly everything, because there was one thing that was missing, and that was a child. You see, as long and as hard as they tried, no seed had taken hold.
One day, the wife, she walked into the garden, and it was winter, and the whole land was covered in snow. And there she sat under the juniper tree. And looking at the snow on the branches, she took out an apple and a knife, and she started to cut the apple. But she cut herself, and one drop of blood fell on the white snow. So this woman, she looked at the snow, and she sighed, "Oh, if only I had a child as white as this snow and as red as this drop of blood."
1 month went by, and the snow disappeared.
2 months went by, and the world turned green.
3 months went by, and all the flowers bloomed out of the earth.
4 months went by, and the branches grew heavy and into each other, and birds started to sit on them and sing a song that reverberated through the trees of the forest, while from this tree the blossom fell on the ground.
5 months went by, and the woman stood under the juniper tree, and she smelled it, and it was so sweet. It felt as if her heart was leaping out of her chest with joy.
6 months went by, and the fruit grew ripe and plump, but the woman grew still.
7 months went by, and she was struck with a craving, a certain kind of craving that only a certain kind of people in a particular situation can know. And she ran to that tree, and she started to pluck those round and little juicy berries, and she ate them. She ate more and more and more until she ate so much that she fell sick.
8 months went by, and when she was still lying in her sick bed, she called out sadly to her husband, and she said, "Husband, if I am to die, please bury me under that juniper tree."
9 months went by, and a child was born, as white as snow and as red as a drop of blood. And when his mother held him in her arms, there was no more sorrow, there was no more sadness. And it was out of pure joy that she died that night.
So the husband, he did what he had promised. He buried his wife under the juniper tree, and then he took care of the boy as much as he could. I mean, it's difficult to raise a kid on your own. The house felt empty. His bed felt emptier still. So he started to look around, you know, as men have always done in these old stories, to find someone to replace the one he had lost, you know, to continue the story of his life where he had left it behind.
Yeah, and he found her, a woman, to take care of his needs. You know, they got married. They had another child, a daughter this time, which they called Marlinchen. And you know, for him, he was happy. Life was perfect. And for her, life was almost perfect. You see why? Because when she looked at her daughter, she was filled with joy. But whenever she looked at her son, at her stepson, that was white as snow and red as blood, she felt rage. It was felt as if his eyes were cutting at her heart, one little piece at a time.
So one day, she went to her room, and her daughter Marlinchen followed her. And Marlinchen said, "Mom, may I have an apple?" And the mother said, "Of course, my love. Of course you may." And she walked to this big, heavy chest that was in the corner of the room. This chest that had a heavy lid that she opened, and from inside she chose the roundest, biggest, plumpest, most red apple that she had, and she gave it to her daughter. And the daughter took it in her hand, looked out of the window, and saw her brother play outside. So the daughter said to the mother, "Mother, is my brother to have one as well?"
The mother stood up. She looked out of the window, and there he was, her stepson, white as snow and red as fucking blood. He was cutting at her heart, one little piece at a time.
Cheguei ao meio da vida, já cansada de tanto caminhar.
Before her daughter could take a bite from the apple, she snatched it and she threw it into the chest. She stood up and she walked down to the garden where she saw her stepson and said to him, "You've been playing all day long. Come, you need to eat something. Do you want an apple?" She led him back into the room. She opened the lid of the heavy chest and she said to the boy, "Go, you can pick the best apple, whichever you want."
Tanto tenho aprendido, mas não sei nada. As dores de uma vida que eu construí em trágica loucura és destruída.
The mother, she slammed the lid on top of the white neck of the boy. Hard. So hard that his head just flew off and rolled among the red apples.
That's when the terror entered her body. I mean, not for the boy, but for herself. She thought, my God, if my husband finds out, he will never forgive me, right? So she picked up the body of the boy and put him on a chair and then opened the lid and among the apples took his head and put him on the neck. And then she took a handkerchief and put it around the neck of the boy. One of the apples she put in his hand. And then she walked into the kitchen and started preparing some food. Now, not so long after, her daughter Marleenchen came into the kitchen and said, "Mother, the weirdest thing has happened. I just passed my brother and he was sitting there with an apple. And when I asked him if I can have the apple, he ignored me. He didn't say a thing." Marleenchen, that's not nice. You know what? Go back to him and ask him again for the apple. And if he ignores you again, if again he's impolite, teach him a lesson. Smack him on the head. Well, you can imagine what happened next, right? Didn't take long before Marleenchen ran back into the kitchen, crying her eyes out, shouting, "Mother, mother, mother, I hit my brother and his head fell off." To which the mother said, "Oh, my Marleenchen, what have you done? But don't worry, your good mother will make everything be all right. Your brother, well, we have no choice. Maybe we can cook him in the blood pudding." And with that, the mother collected the body of the boy, cut him into pieces, put the pieces into the pan, started cooking the pudding. All the while, her daughter standing next to the pot and crying all the time into the pot, tear after tear. And the mother said, "Hush, hush, my girl, hush, hush. What is done cannot be undone. And besides, the food will be far too salty like this."
A little while later, the father came back, and he sat at the table, and he was served with the food. As he was eating this blood pudding, the juice dripping on his beard, licking the fingers, delicious. "Where is my son?" he said. And the mother said, "He went away to the father of his late mother. He will come back in 6 weeks." He says, "Don't tell me, that's strange. Why did you not say goodbye to me? This is really delicious." No, don't worry. He will be well taken care of there." And the father ate. And he saw that Marleenchen started to cry. "Don't cry. Your brother will come back in 6 weeks, huh? And why are you leaving this plate empty? I told you, we don't like to leave food in this house." And he ate some more. Delicious. And the more he ate, "Give me some more," the more he wanted to eat. And he kept throwing the bones under the chair until there was no more food left. And then he laid back and he took out this big burp and he went to his bedroom. At At that moment, Marlinchen, she stood up. She went to her bedroom and she opened this little box, took out a handkerchief made of silk, white. She went down. She took the bones and one by one placed them inside the handkerchief, tied it, went outside, and under the juniper tree, she buried it as far as her little fingers could. And like this, the son was buried on top of his mother.
So the juniper tree started to tremble. Like a mighty wind had taken hold of it. And in this tremble, a mist appeared around the tree. And in the heart of this mist, there was a fire. And in the heart of that fire, there was a bird. And this bird flew out of the bosom of the tree, singing its song.
I was born by the river in this little town, just like that river. I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know my change will come. Oh, yes, it is. It's been too hard living. Oh, I'm afraid to die. I don't know what's up there beyond the clouds. It's been a such a long time coming, but I know my change will come.
Now there is at least two ways we can imagine the ending of the story. First one, the classical version, the one that you can find in old books or on the internet. You can read about this bird who flew out and sang its song, and it went to houses near and far, and wherever it went, whoever it sang to, no one could deny the bird what it asked. So when the bird passed the house of the goldsmith, the house of the shoemaker, and the house of the miller, the bird received a golden chain, red shoes, and a heavy miller's stone. And with these items, the bird flew back to the mansion and threw down the golden chain on the neck of his father, the red shoes in front of the feet of his sister, Marlinchen, and from a great height, the heavy miller's stone on the head of his mother, who died in an instant. And then when the mother was dead, the bird flew back into the bosom of the tree. The tree started to tremble again, a mist appeared again, and a fire in the heart of that mist. And from that fire emerged a boy, white as snow and red as a drop of blood.
And there is another possible ending. And in that one, there is not evil and jealous mother. And there is no weak and naive father either, but just a girl that is called Marlinche, but pretty soon she becomes a woman and is called Marlene. And one day she has a daughter of her own. And one day when they sit under the juniper tree, her daughter tells her mother, tells me a story. And at that moment she feels something opens up in her gut. And it starts to travel all the way up her chest into her throat. And then it translates into images and then to words. And she hears herself saying, once upon a time, there was a couple. And they were perfect. They had everything. Land, mansion, and in the middle of the garden, a juniper tree. And more important than that, between them, flowing like a river, was love. They had everything. Well, not exactly everything. One thing was missing, a child.
There's a time I would go to my brother. I asked my brother, brother, will you help me please? but he turned me down, and I went to see my mother, my dear mother. I said, Mother, I'm down on my bitter knee.
Okay, very short Armenian story, yeah? A man marries a woman, and his wife ends up hating his mother, yeah? Do you know that situation? Anyone? Well, you don't have to say it out loud, just in your heart. So basically, they're fighting until one day his wife, she's had enough. She goes to the man and she says, listen, either you kill your mother or I will leave you, that's it. So this man who was in love with his wife and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, feels he has no choice, grabs the knife, goes to his mother and kills her, takes out the heart, throws it away. Some weeks pass, and he's walking down the street, and then suddenly he stumbles over something, and he falls, and he scrapes his knee, and there's a bit of blood coming, and he turns around, and he sees that what he had stumbled over was the discarded heart of his mother. And the moment that he looks back at it, suddenly the heart starts to speak. It says, oh, my child, oh, I'm so sorry. I hope you didn't hurt yourself. Right?
Where did you find that story? I don't know.
I used to date an Armenian woman, but that's another story.
There's many stories there. So our mothers, it's funny because my mother, she came to visit me in Amsterdam 5 years ago. Time flies so quickly. And when she came, I told her that I want her to meet my best friend. So we went to visit him. Not so far away from here, where his parents live. Admiral de Rauterweg, I believe that's the right pronunciation. Yeah? It's a difficult one. It's a little flat, you go inside, it's steaming hot, and everyone are huddled together. And I remember that when we went there, my mother was already on the way, very excited, and she asked me all these kind of questions. And when we were next to the door, I saw her already kind of sniffing around, saying, what are they cooking in the kitchen? And then the door opened, and she looked around, and I saw 20 years dissolve from her skin. I saw the eyes of a child. She was looking at this world she had left behind, the Persian carpets, at the silver plates on the walls, at the books in Farsi. And then his mother and his father came, and they led us into the living room, and we sat there for hours, and they were talking in Farsi, and I didn't understand the word, but I didn't care. And at a certain point, there was this scene where his father kind of was cooking in the kitchen, and suddenly his mother said, Ali, bring ice cream. And his father brought ice cream, and they started to feed each other ice cream. You don't believe it, huh? You think it's a kind of nice way to end the story? Do you believe this story? Yeah? Believe it? You don't believe it so much, right? Kind of, huh? You believe? Ah, yeah, you believe this story. Wow, you're naive, huh? I mean, it's a very nice way to end the story like this, to wrap it all up, like to say, look, we are all here together and life is beautiful. But actually, you're right. You don't have any reason to be naive. But I thought in case there is the one person here that might be a bit skeptical, I brought a proof and a picture, which I would like to show to you. Can you guess which one is my mother? Huh? The gray hair. The other one. Yeah, the one on top is my mother, and this is his mother. So thank you, mothers, for everything that you had given us. That's most...
Yeah. If they're still there behind the camera.
If they're still there and have not fallen asleep throughout the stories.
Yeah. No, thanks our mothers. Thank your mothers. Thanks everyone for listening to the stories. the stories of this first night of the Storytelling Festival, which is so much more intimate than we're used to. But we're very happy around this tiny little carpet that we could open it for you with some stories, with some apples, which very strangely no one took. Maybe it's the Corona times. But you know, on the way out, don't worry. You know, there we cleaned them very carefully.
Don't think about apple puddings when you eat them.
It's all good. It's all good. And don't forget that, as we said, this is just the first night of a few in which many more stories will be shared. Some of them live here on stage, but again, because it's so limited, many more people who can log in from wherever it is that you are and listen to the talks that we've prepared tomorrow, the day after, and even the day after that. But for now, maybe we just close the night with one more song. How does that sound? Yeah?
Let's do it.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out. And we're going to say just a quick goodbye to the people who are streaming so they know that if the stream disappears, why that is. Thank you so much for logging in. One final wave to them. Bye. You're not going to see any of that, but people back home are going to see it. Bye. See you in the next few days. And the rest of you, thank you so much for coming out. Thanks again.
Thank you.